Hello, good morning. Welcome everyone. Hi. And thanks so much for being here. Welcome to the Zero Carbon Future Pavilion hosted by the Clean Air Task Force. My name is Magnolia Tovar, and I am the Global Director of the Zero Carbon Fuels at the Clean Air Task Force. So welcome everyone. Today's event is named Catalyzing Cost-Effective Hydrogen Imports in Europe. And as you know, Europe is the largest oil and gas importer of the world. And despite critical efforts to expand electrification in a net zero world, in a decarbonized world, Europe will remain a net energy importer. So catalyzing cost-effective hydrogen imports is crucial for the European economy. So using the Port of Rotterdam as a test case, CATF commissioned a study last year in 2021 to assess the levelized cost of hydrogen from different locations around the world. And today we're going to present the key findings of the study, and then we're also going to discuss the findings and talk about what do we need to do in order to catalyze cost-economic hydrogen imports. So now I'm going to introduce our distinguished panelists. Dr. Kaufmann, welcome. Dr. Stefan Kaufmann serves as an advisor to ThyssenKrupp and the ThyssenKrupp board regarding all cross-border business hydrogen activities and projects, and represents the company nationally and internationally in all matters related to hydrogen. Dr. Kaufmann previously was the Innovation Officer for Green Hydrogen at the Federal Ministry of Education and Research in Germany. Welcome. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Peter Schnierin from the Future Clean Tech Architects. We've collaborated many times in the past, so thank you so much for being here. Peter is the founder and CEO of Future, the think tank called Future Clean Tech Architects in Germany, and he has a PhD on climate policy and technology from the Bonn University. He served as a consultant to both the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Secretariat and the International Energy Agency, working on topics from hydrogen infrastructure to carbon capture and storage. Welcome. Our next speaker is Dr. Tobias Umbregel. Welcome. Dr. Tobias Umbregel is a postdoc at the Center for Excellence, Climatic Change and Society at the University of Hamburg, and a researcher at the Center for Applied Research in partnership with the Orient, CARPO. Dr. Umbregel is the author of Political Power and Environmental Sustainability in Gulf Monarchies. And last but not least, Nikunj Panchal, who is joining us virtually, remotely, because he couldn't be here, and he will be presenting the KBR study results. Nikunj is the Global Director at KBR Advisory Business with 22 years of experience of energy industry with a track record of end-to-end project delivery and business leadership, driving business growth and commercial success. Let's first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to present a couple of slides on why do we need hydrogen, the needs for hydrogen in a decarbonized world, and then we're going to conduct two little polls, and after that we'll watch the video from Nikunj Panchal from KBR, and then we'll go into our panel discussion. So. Today, 80% of the end-use energy is currently provided by fuel molecules like coal, natural gas, and refined petroleum products. In a decarbonized world, despite critical efforts to expand electrification, there are sectors of the economy that will be very hard to electrify. And those sectors, like, for example, greenfield steel making, long-haul trucking, shipping, high process temperature heat, those sectors will require decarbonized molecules, and those are molecules that do not emit carbon when they are combusted or used, and the most promising zero-carbon fuels are hydrogen and ammonia. This is a slide that shows the hydrogen production supply chain. Is obviously a nascent economy, and you can see here that hydrogen can be produced through different pathways, natural gas with carbon capture and storage and strict methane emissions control, and also electrolytic hydrogen with super hot rock geothermal energy, nuclear energy, and solar and wind. And then if the hydrogen will be transported via maritime, you can see the top one, which is the value chain. It needs to be converted into a carrier, stored, compressed, transported, and then hydrogen needs to be liberated for further distribution to end users. And the one at the bottom is just hydrogen delivery via pipeline. All right, so let's talk about Europe's forecasted hydrogen demand, and I'm gonna do a little poll here. We're gonna do it the analog way, so please raise your hand. The question is, what is the current EU hydrogen demand? So 2 million tons per year? All right. 5 million tons per year? 8 million tons per year? How about higher? Okay. And then the next one is, in a decarbonized world in 2050, what do you think will be the projected EU hydrogen demand? 20 million tons? How about 30? 30 there. 60? How about higher? All right, seems that higher is the answer. Well, you can see here that the current Europe hydrogen demand is about 8.3 million tons per year. Sometimes it's higher. And then what you see here are 5 to 6 different studies. Some of them were commissioned by the European Commission, other ones were done by DNV or Guidehouse, and they all show the projected hydrogen demand in 2050. And it is expected that it's more than 60 million tons per year. So the last question was the right one. So thanks so much. And these are the sectors where hydrogen will be deployed. And you can see that all the studies agree that hydrogen will be, or a large portion of the hydrogen will be deployed in the transport sector and also in the industrial sector. So in May this year, the European Commission acknowledged that Europe will not be able to produce all its own hydrogen in sufficient quantities to decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors. This was said by the Vice President of the European Commission and the Green leader, the Green Deal leader, Franz Timmermans, and he expressed that we want to create partnerships because the European Union will need much more hydrogen that we can produce ourselves, and we're going to talk about this in our panel discussion. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a video from Nikush Pashal, who is joining us remotely to talk and present the hydrogen imports study.
Of course, the request came from CATF almost a year ago about assessing the low carbon and renewable hydrogen assessment for importing it from various sources across the globe into Rotterdam. KBR Advisory operates in a sustainability energy transition space. Our prime focus in terms of solutions and services are around strategy, finance, and technology. So we bring all three elements together, and especially in the energy transition space, whether it's in hydrogen, decarbonization, CCUS, hydrogen carriers, or circular economy principles, we operate in that zone. I am Nikunj Panchal. I'm the global director for the KBS advisory business, and of course, I engage personally with the clients as well in advising them on developing the strategies and the not just hydrogen pathways, but energy transition pathways for the regions, for the nations, as well as for the corporates as well, and helping them achieve their goals in the most economical way and providing the bankable solution. The idea of the study is to look at different capacity and demands through 2030, 2030, 2050, and also explore the potential export locations in terms of marine transportation of hydrogen carriers from the countries like Norway, USA, Argentina, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, and the pipeline options from the countries like Norway, Nigeria, and at the time, Russia was in consideration as well. So the assessment was carried out for all these potential export location at different capacities and also for different hydrogen carriers, namely liquid hydrogen, MCH, which is methyl cyclohexane, which is a liquid organic hydrogen carrier, and also ammonia. An ammonia assessment was done both on the basis of cracked ammonia and uncracked ammonia. And the findings from the report, as we summarize in here, that cracked ammonia provided the lowest levelized cost of hydrogen in terms of bringing it to Rotterdam. Ammonia is across all the territories and geographies have been the cheapest source of hydrogen carrier and bringing it into Rotterdam. So that is a favored solution in many ways. A similar assessment, if you look at into pipeline transportation mode, we had three options, but I'm focusing more around Norway and Algeria, predominantly. Norway, of course, provides the most economic LCOH based on the pipeline route options for the small scale, which is 250 kdpa. But as the economy of scale grows, Algeria becomes a lot more favorable. As far as the energy security, energy trilemma is considered, of course, the short-term low carbon hydrogen provides advantage from certain sources, whether it's Saudi Arabia or Algeria. But with the increasing gas pricing put into the mix as well, the green hydrogen becomes a lot more economical as well over a period of time. And with the technology maturity comes in play, that improves the economics for the green ammonia or the low carbon hydrogen-based ammonia as well. Overall, ammonia has known challenges, known risk, and ammonia is kind of a globally traded commodity as well. So the supply chain perspective, technology perspective, it's a lot more mature. It's in a carbon-free source as well, as far as the carbon footprints are concerned. And if you look at the potential for using ammonia in an uncracked form for power generation is also in a right path as well. So it offers a great advantage in many respects compared to many other carriers, whether it's in a LOHC or even liquid hydrogen. But most notable is important here is the infrastructure. Bringing that hydrogen into Rotterdam would require a lot of investments happening, whether it's a storage, whether it's a shipment, whether it's a domestic pipeline network, etc. There will be a lot of investment needed in that sense. With regards to green hydrogen supply chain or value chain, as we know, electrolyzers has been a kind of a known technology, but the maturity of the technology is further to go, especially when we talk about PEM. So electrolysis process or electrolyzer manufacturing is where a majority of the investment is expected, along with infrastructure, as we talked about earlier. And if we talk about ammonia in particular, then the direct use of ammonia for the power generation process, of course, there will be a lot of investments happening in that regard as well, and in creating the technology, commercialization of those technologies, and implementation of those technologies. So that's where the major investment opportunity exists. If you look at the hydrogen value chain, let's start from the beginning. One is the electrolysis process itself. Electrolyzer efficiency is the prime factor where the improvements required from a technology point of view. PEM is there, it's considered to be most promising, but of course there is still lots of innovations happening in that regard. So definitely that's one area where further technology and innovations required. I would say precious metals play another important role in terms of decarbonization of the economy, and as far as the hydrogen value chains are considered, again, there's a massive role they play as well. So developing, establishing solutions for sustainable utilization of those precious metals is again a key element. So reuse, recycle principle, that's where another important investment needs to, or innovation needs to happen. And last but not least, if we talk about ammonia, then ammonia itself, the production is the proven technology. But when we talk about cracking of ammonia and utilization of ammonia as a direct fuel for power generation, that's where another innovation is required. So the cracking of ammonia maybe high pressure, high temperature technology, it might be less energy efficient. But over a period of time, if you develop the catalyst such a way, then the process becomes low pressure, low temperature, and a lot more efficient. Then that's where the innovation needs to lead to. And of course, the fuel cells for direct use of ammonia for power generation is another area where the innovation is the key. When we talk about liquid hydrogen, this is by far the most expensive from economics perspective. It requires hydrogen storage in cryogenic temperatures, which is not easy. And of course, from an energy efficiency point of view, it takes a lot of energy. I don't see hydrogen, liquid hydrogen especially, can become viable. Of course, unless there is a massive breakthrough technology improvement happens, then we don't know. But purely thermodynamic principle says that it's not going to be energy efficient in many respects. Infrastructure development, whether it's domestically or inter-region, I think it's a very, very important factor in making sure this hydrogen projects really becomes viable as well. I mean, if you have the hydrogen produced, but there are no tangible ways and means to bring that to European market, then of course it doesn't help. And especially when we talk about the specific region where the hydrogen can be economically transported into Europe, then pipeline is the best option. So having that infrastructure in place for bringing the hydrogen into Europe and then further distributing to the end users, whether it's industrial or domestic, I think that plays a very critical role. And it's, in a way, I would say it's a catalyst to scale up further investments into the hydrogen space as well.
Thank you very much, and thanks to Nikunj for that excellent presentation. So maybe we can start our panel discussion. And I was just wondering if you have any initial thoughts about the study results. Nikunj talked about the infrastructure that will be required to import hydrogens into Europe. Infrastructure carriers will be required, and ammonia appears to be the most, at the moment, the most favorable hydrogen carrier. So I was just wondering, any of you has some initial thoughts about it?
Yes, good morning from my side. So I'm here today more for ThyssenKrupp Steel, but ThyssenKrupp does also a lot of other things. So they're building ammonia plants, they are building electrolyzers, and I can only agree what is said before. Especially ammonia will play a very key role, and the question of cracking it in a big scale in Rotterdam at the harbors, or also maybe transported via train to the end users and cracking it there where the demand is, maybe in southern Germany. That is something we have to decide now on an infrastructure point. But ammonia will play a key role, and that's why the ammonia industry will grow significantly in the next years.
Thank you. Peter, Tobias, any thoughts?
Thank you. Thank you, Magnolia, for the invitation. Yes, a couple of very important points, I think, were mentioned by Nikunj. And I think it's important that he also pointed, or in your joint study, you pointed to the gaps that are still there in innovation. So while ammonia, as was stressed, is a mature or is an established industry, of course, it's a known process. The cracking process, for example, or he was also referring to some aspects in the electrolysis process itself. I would like to add, there's a couple of steps. There's some alternatives out there that might be very interesting in the mid to long term. I mean, everybody's talking alkaline or PM, of course, at the moment because they're most mature, but there's other things in the pipeline. And what's very important, third point, I think, would be that it's all based on figures and projections, and also, and we had this, Magnolia, the other day when you were a guest in one of our panels. Seeing the scale and the size of the challenge is so important. I mean, how little there is right now and how far we would want to go with this for these hard-to-abate sectors or the heavy energy industries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Also from my side, very happy to be here, and many thanks for the invitation. I mean, I can only second what my previous speakers have already said. I think also that ammonia is right now the most cost competitive solution, but we have still some shortcomings, especially with the ammonia crackers, the infrastructure for this, the highly energy intensive process. So we should also always bear in mind and be specific about for which and to what demand and scope and scale we are needing this, because in either way, whether it's liquid or by a derivate like ammonia, it's like a very intensive process. We have to build up and scale up the infrastructure. So hydrogen will not be a source that will be available, I mean, to a huge amount and to a large scale. So we should really be reflect on where we really need to it. So where are the hard to abate sectors? And the other point, just shortly, and maybe you can also discuss this a little bit later, when we are talking about importing it and using it by shipping, or especially by shipping, I mean, it's not as explosive and dangerous like hydrogen, but still it's a poisoned material. So we have to be careful also about saving and safety measures and also safety roads when it comes to transport those kind of ammonia.
Thanks so much, Tobias, for that. And maybe I have a question for you, because you're an expert on the Middle East, and we saw that from the numbers that Nikunj presented, that the Middle East has the potential to become one of the largest decarbonized energy suppliers for Europe. And what needs to happen in order to catalyze this from your perspective, looking at the Gulf countries that have that potential to scale hydrogen at the moment? So yeah, what do you think needs to happen?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the Gulf states, especially the Gulf states, are positioning themselves right now for being really one of the key exporters on hydrogen. But we have also other countries in the Middle East, in North Africa, that are trying to catch up on this new development. Well, I mean, in terms of challenges, there are some quite, but let me first maybe also dive a little bit deeper into the overall, scope conditions right now, because especially the Gulf monarchies have excellent conditions for producing large amounts of renewable energy sources, so solar, but also wind. And there's also a great political willingness by the oil and gas Gulf monarchies to diversify their energy portfolio into more renewable energy sectors. And we have also the infrastructure. The first shipment of ammonia was already done by Saudi Arabia to Japan, I think 2 or 3 years ago. So there's actually a lot of developments we can see there. But of course, we are also facing some shortcomings so far. And this relates a little bit to general problems we are facing in the Middle East, that is terms of technology. So they are mostly technology taker. They need to import cutting edge technology. For some countries, this not really relates to the Gulf monarchies, but financing is a very crucial thing, especially for countries like Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco, who also wants to play a part in this development. And lastly, human capacity, especially for the Gulf monarchies, is a crucial point here. So those are some core challenges. And then we also need to talk about the feedstock for, especially when we are talking about green hydrogen. So while those Gulf monarchies are trying now to scale up their renewable energy sources, they are still lagging behind. I mean, we are talking about something like 13 or 15% of installed renewable energy capacities in the United Arab Emirates, which are the front runners. Saudi Arabia and the other countries are almost by 1% installed renewable energy sources. So they will come up, but it will take time. And then we have to discuss whether these sources should be used for hydrogen, for producing hydrogen, which is then exported, or whether it should be used for domestic consumption. So this is one problem, and maybe a last statement concerning also the other problem, and this is fresh water. So we need fresh water for green hydrogen production, and in a water-scarce region like the Middle East, this is a very, very, very difficult problem. So most of the water right now is actually either consumed by using groundwater reserves or by desalination, and desalination comes not without problems. It's an energy-intensive process, currently also used by burning fossil fuels, and the other point is that it's polluting. So it's polluting especially the Arabian Sea, which is almost known as the most toxic sea in the world. So there are actually a lot of things we have to discuss or that have to be improved.
Thank you so much, Tobias. And in addition to that, we also have other challenges like certification of hydrogen and all that. So I would love to talk about that later on. Thanks so much. So I have a question for Peter. Peter, so as indicated previously, the European Commission has acknowledged that hydrogen imports will be required, but I think there's still some narrative that we will be able to produce all the hydrogen that we will need in Europe. So I just wanted you to maybe talk a little bit about why that will not be possible and what are the challenges to generate all that hydrogen that we will need in Europe, so why imports will be needed. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, I think something that Tobias already pointed out to some extent is Europe is at a certain geographical disadvantage when it comes to renewable power generation. There's some exceptions in the North Sea, for example, partly in the Baltic Sea, but generally the availability of the resource is not so good when it comes to creating massive amounts of renewable electricity. Second point, demand, since we're about to electrify almost anything, demand for clean electricity will continue to grow. There's other options. You're doing work on this. A couple of other actors also beyond the classic renewable solar PV or wind. But in order to meet this enormous demand by the energy-intensive industries, which in Europe represent about 15% of emissions, and some of these processes where hydrogen makes a lot of sense, because as you all know, there's a lot of applications where hydrogen does not make sense, and still some governments go for it, or some research funding is still placed even in 2022 to this, including in our home country, Germany. So in order to meet those demands, such as in steel production, such as in some chemical processes, where we definitely will need hydrogen to go for net zero, we will need these imports. It's hardly possible. I mean, we've done a couple of overviews on this, and also the scales, visualizing the scales of the challenge of meeting these demands, of switching these heavy industry processes, which are currently predominantly either fired or get their resource through their feedstock through fossil fuels, to switch them to hydrogen while not having some type of hydrogen import in place. And a second thought, if I may, this will be challenging. Transport is expensive. Hydrogen does not like to be transported. It prefers to be consumed on site. Like 85% of world hydrogen production is consumed right where it's produced. And in order to change that, and Nikunj has made a couple of points of this, and my colleagues here on the panel as well, there's a number of challenges to be overcome.
Thanks so much for that. And that takes me to the next question for Dr. Kaufmann. Europe is home to several energy-intensive industries, and in particularly Germany, right? There's a strong industrial beating heart in Germany, and steel is one of them. So steel is anticipated to be one of the largest off-takers of hydrogen in Europe. I was just wondering if you could unpack that a little bit and talk to us about why hydrogen will be required to decarbonize the steel industry, and if you can give us the perspective of ThyssenKrupp on hydrogen deployment for the steel industry. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. So the German steel industry is responsible for around 8% of our emissions in Germany, so around 60 million tons of CO2 emissions a year. So ThyssenKrupp is the biggest steel producer in Germany with around a third of these emissions. So ThyssenKrupp in Duisburg is producing 20 million tons of CO2 a year. And for sure, we want to hold the steel industry in Germany. There's a clear political will not to import the steel, but produce it in Germany. And that's why we have to think about options. So we want to be climate neutral in 2045, like the German strategy is for the country as a whole. And what does it mean? So we started with an investment decision some weeks ago. We replaced one of our blast furnaces by a direct reduction plant with an investment of 2.5 billion euros. It's funded by the federal state, but also by the state of North Rhine-Westphalia. And the goal is starting 26, producing 2.5 million tons of green steel with green hydrogen or with hydrogen, losing 3.5 million tons of CO2, reducing 3.5 million tons of CO2. But what does it mean? That means that we have a demand starting 2026 of around 200 to 250,000 tons of hydrogen a year to run this direct reduction plan. And for sure, the idea is to replace also the other 3 blast furnaces then in the time. So that's why we are one of the biggest off-takers in Europe, starting from 2026. And for sure, the question is, where does it come from, the hydrogen? In Germany as a whole, we are thinking about an import demand of 80% in 2050. And for sure, we look for a local production of hydrogen close to Duisburg, with STEAG, for example. But for sure, it will not be enough. So we're talking about import projects with Equinor, for example, and other energy suppliers.
So that takes me to another question. About 80% of hydrogen imports, a lot of deployment in the steel industry, but as we know, hydrogen is more expensive than the fuels it is replacing. So from your perspective, what needs to happen on a member state level, Germany level, and on an EU to be able to enable the uptake of these fuels in our heavy industries?
Yes, from the German steel perspective, we have to say that around a third of the steel is needed in the automotive industry. And we think that the price of the green steel is around 30% higher than the gray steel. And we think that maybe in this automotive sector, the customers will pay maybe these higher prices. But anyway, we are talking about contracts for difference. We are talking about carbon leakage instruments. And for sure, we are discussing about border adjustment on a European level. So we need it harmonized for the European steel industry at all. And for sure, we need instruments not only to fund the capex costs, like I talked about, the investment in the direct reduction plan, but we're also looking for contracts for difference instruments, not only in the national, but also on the European level.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that. So carbon contracts for difference or contracts for difference to close the commercialization gap and enable the uptake of these fuels and feedstock, right? Because hydrogen is also a feedstock for the industry. So thanks for that. My next question is for Tobias. Tobias, I have a question. So let's talk about hydrogen certification because at the moment there's not, let's say, a harmonized, internationally recognized system to certify hydrogen. We still talk about colors, where we should be talking about carbon intensity. I was just wondering, from a Gulf perspective, Orient perspective, how can we accelerate this and create a system that provides confidence for investors to invest in these technologies and for the industry to uptake these fuels?
Well, okay, providing a little bit the Orient perspective here.
And or European, both ways. I mean, you have both.
No, it's absolutely fine. Only that the term is a little bit anachronistic. But I mean, what we can see that there's definitely not a certification scheme here in place in the Middle East, and I have my doubts whether this is actually also or will be achieved in a certain time. So. To look a little bit from the Gulf perspective and the Gulf monarchies, we have here highly ambitious countries that are competing over market shares in a lot of different aspects and niches. So, and they want to remain their power, their political and economic power in a climate constrained world where we are calling for more decarbonization, and here hydrogen comes into play. So they are positioning themselves for this kind of new technology and to be relevant when the selling of oil and gas is not so, or does not come with so much revenues as before or the last century. But what we can see is that there's not much cooperation between those states. They are actually more competing with each other, and all those agreements, I mean, especially Germany, have made a lot of MOUs and signed other agreements, but this only happens on a bilateral way. And there are not really incentives to have a multilateral agreement or dialogue here, because I mean, in their perspective, it's also very productive to be in competition, But of course, I mean, this can also from time to time hamper trust of investors. But so far, and we have just heard it, I mean, there's so much demand, especially from the European side, that I think that, well, the European Union or countries like Germany are also not in a good position for providing those incentives, because they, in the end, just want to get the hydrogen. And maybe they are not really so keen about, well, do we have a certain harmonized agreement on what is green hydrogen, and do we have a certification here on a regional level among, for example, the Gulf states? So in a nutshell, I really have my doubts that we can implement a scheme like this. And I would just also ask the other panelists whether they think it's necessary, or do you see that we can also, or are there ways to circumvent this? So this would be my question also to you guys.
Please, yeah,
Shall
go
I
ahead.
start?
Yep, please, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Tobias. Well, do we need a scheme or not? I think it would be very helpful if there would be some common ground at least, or something, like a guiding star that could be serve as some orientation. I think the most important point from a climate effectiveness point of view is the integrity of the process. So you were mentioning a very important point, Magnolia, which is the carbon intensity. And by this, actually carbon intensity is not enough. It would be greenhouse gas intensity, because talking about other colors, leave aside whether the color scheme makes sense at all, but talking about hydrogen with CCS, for example, methane plays a key role in the puzzle, or has a key role to play in the whole process. And so I think the point you're raising is very important. Do we need the scheme? I believe at least we need, when we tackle it not just from a supply perspective, so we need the hydrogen somewhere. You were mentioning the impressive amounts that ThyssenKrupp will need by 2026, I believe. So one thing is, let's get it to Europe. The second thing is, if we really take the climate policy perspective seriously, we need to have control, and the process needs to have integrity. So we will make sure we monitor the whole life cycle emissions of the process. Otherwise, it's a shadow game. Otherwise, we might be pretending to do something good for climate, and we don't. And we do that at higher cost than with natural gas. So the whole process, and it's complex to do that. Yeah. But maybe my colleague wants to add something.
Yes, I think the investors need, for their final investments decision, they need a scheme, at least on a European level. I think it's really difficult to get it on international level soon, but we have really to work on a European scheme to have clarity, and yes, and we need a pragmatic way for this scheme. That's why what we're talking about, what is green, and for sure we have to talk about methane leakage when we talk about blue hydrogen, but at the end we have to have a starting point also for the industry. And now at the moment everything is not clear. And when we look to United States with the IRA, looking on the carbon footprint, which is much more pragmatic than the European way, I think that should be the way we also should act in Europe.
Yes, please go ahead. Yes.
With another intervention here, but many thanks for your remarks, and I definitely agree. I mean, we should need some certification schemes in order to have, well, to trace and to track the whole process of hydrogen, and not to have some problems, leakages and stuff like this. But I just wanted to raise the point that, well, they are not really interested in such a scheme, and there are definitely reasons why, and here it gets blurred. So for the Gulf monarchies, I mean, they are talking about green hydrogen, but they know that they are just doing this to cater a certain Western taste, because the most side, or the prosperous markets are also in Asia, and they would also consume blue hydrogen. And even Germany have now, at least in their memoranda of understanding with the United Arab Emirates, have also discussed the role blue hydrogen can play as a transition fuel when it comes then to green hydrogen. And I just wanted to make one other point here. If we are talking about blue hydrogen in terms and from the perspective of the Gulf monarchies, we are not really talking about CCS here. We are not talking about carbon capture and storage. So what I have observed over the last 10 days here, and I was in a lot of panels with regard to where Gulf monarchies have talked about the decarbonization, it's actually really interesting because they have now agreed, I think, that they are just using and speaking of CCUS. So we are talking here about carbon capture, utilization and storage, which is a definitely different process, which is more ecological harmful, where the captured carbon is actually used for example, enhancing more oil and gas. So they see actually here an exit strategy for, well, still selling oil and gas because they don't see that carbon is the enemy, it's the fugitive gases. And they want to have technology and innovation to find a way where they can still be relevant in terms of being the global oil and gas suppliers.
Please go ahead.
Yes, I was part of the German Hydrogen Advisory Council for 2 years, and we had a lot of discussions about blue hydrogen and green hydrogen and its colors. And at the end, we are clear that we need blue hydrogen in the transition period, and it's the same with ThyssenKrupp. We won't get these amounts I talked about in 2026 in green, so we have to talk to Equinor. They want a supply with blue hydrogen at the first step. But what we not did in Germany, we didn't fund blue hydrogen technologies with our 9 billion funding. So this was only for green hydrogen. Also my position, I was officer for green hydrogen. So everybody asked me, you don't like blue hydrogen? It was about the funding, not funding some storage technologies, but we are very aware that we need blue hydrogen or blue ammonia at the very beginning for the first transition.
Yeah, oh yeah, sure. I just wanted to make a couple of comments about what Tobias said. So we know that the European Commission will release its greenhouse emissions reduction methodology, the calculations, in December 2024. At least that has been announced, and it will also release its Europe-wide certification system. But until then, there's a lot of uncertainty because at the moment we don't even know what the scope of work will be. So, for example, at CATF, we're advocating for a scope of work that includes upstream emissions, production, storage, all the emissions across the entire value chain of the hydrogen production to ensure that it will be produced with low emissions. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to mention. Peter, go ahead, please.
No, also just adding to that, to the comment on CCUS, we're just completing a joint study on building up industrial hydrogen clusters in developing countries, and I have not given up hope. Of course, the application you mentioned is the one for enhanced oil recovery, gas recovery, but there's a couple of other CCUS applications, hopefully in clusters, where the captured carbon is used or CO2 is used to derive synthetic fuels or other kind of things that will also be hopefully on the radar in the next decades to come.
Yeah, and I think when we look at the hydrogen challenge, right, the volumes that we will need to decarbonize our economies, not only in Europe, because in Europe we will need more than 60, some studies predict 80 and 90 million tons per year, but globally, right, we have to go from 90 million tons to more than 500 million tons per year. So the challenge is so big that we don't have the luxury to say, well, we're not going to deploy these technologies. And that's why a life cycle analysis with the right scope of work is so crucial for this nascent market at the moment. So, yeah, thanks for that. Dr. Kaufmann, I just wanted to ask you a question because we are obviously talking about catalyzing hydrogen imports into Europe. How does ThyssenKrupp is looking at imports from other regions, like, for example, Norway? And we know that the Port of Rotterdam has announced that they want to become the largest hydrogen hub in Europe, and they plan to import up to 20 million tons of hydrogen by 2050. And a lot of that hydrogen will be deployed in North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany. So how is ThyssenKrupp looking at hydrogen imports? Thanks.
Yes, what I said before, so for sure we are looking for imports. We have this 500 megawatt project in Germany, which is very difficult because of the criteria of additionality. So right now we need additional wind farm, for example, to produce the hydrogen, which is not easy. So that's why we have to import the green hydrogen. And we are talking especially to Equinor from Norway for blue hydrogen. And we are talking to Shell, for example, and for sure Rotterdam will play a key role. And as we talked about ammonia as a carrier from all over the world, we have a problem in the German ports like Hamburg, because ammonia is a little bit, we talked about, toxic. So you can't store ammonia in the harbor of Hamburg, for example. So that's why Rotterdam will play a crucial role also in ammonia cracking, ammonia shipping and landing. And that's why we're also talking about the infrastructure from Duisburg to the port of Rotterdam, also to Wilhelmshaven. But we're talking about, at the end, a big pipeline to supply our plant in Duisburg from Rotterdam. Or from Wilhelmshaven, from Equinor. So these are very concrete off-take agreements that we are discussing at the moment, because, as I said, we'll start 2026, and then we have to have the hydrogen, blue or green or whatever then. Yeah.
Thanks for that. And you mentioned ammonia cracking, and that's one part of the hydrogen value chain that is still, let's say, not a very high technology readiness level. So, Peter, the next question is for you, and it's about the technology that we need that is not yet mature to enable in this value chain. So, ammonia cracking is one of them. I was wondering if you could unpack that a little bit and also talk about any other parts of the value chain that still need to mature.
Thank you. Well, looking at it from beginning to end, so to say, so from the generation of the electricity we will need until the final consumption and as I said, integrity of the whole process. There's a couple of steps, and we mentioned some, Nikunj mentioned some in his presentation that we should look at. So starting with sufficient generation of clean electricity if we think about green hydrogen in the long term. So I'm using colors again, sorry, but everybody knows what we're meaning. We will need alternative ways to, or additional ways, complement ways to meet up with the intermittency of the classic renewables such as solar PV and wind. We will need long-duration energy storage technologies developed, including technologies for hydrogen. In terms of storage, I mean, there's the salt caverns, which are basically ready to be used, but the availability is limited. So on that part of the chain, generation and storage. In generation, many actors are looking into alternative technologies. You mentioned super hot rock geothermal. There's the debate on nuclear, also new types of nuclear that could, new types of also hydro that could supply baseload power. Then we talked about electrolysis or water splitting technologies a little bit. Don't want to go into too much detail, but you mentioned PM, or we mentioned PM, we mentioned alkaline. Both are relatively mature. Here the challenge is scaling and including finding the business cases. I also think in some parts the technology is actually mature, but we lack the business case for some company to scale it up. Transport, we heard the study. Be it a chemical energy carrier, derivatives of hydrogen, where a lot needs to be done. We spoke about the cracking facilities or the cracking technologies that need to be developed further. And then it's the industry side. Here, this is not so much a research need, but it's more regulation need. You mentioned the predictability, the trust in the system that will just need to be developed further. So we see across the whole value chain a couple of critical steps where it lacks R&D sometimes, if it's very far out, where it lacks enough support for the moonshot, so the breakthrough kind of technology. Also, Nikunj was alluding to them briefly, but a lot of it is relatively simple homework. So it's scaling supply and demand at the same time, somehow in sync, so it really works. And it's, playing the state role where the state or the public side needs to be there, because it will not be solved by the market alone.
That's good. Thank you so much for that. Tobias, I think we now can move to talk about some closing remarks and last thoughts. We've talked about technology development, the demand for the steel sector, the challenges to produce hydrogen locally in Europe. We also have infrastructure challenges, because we need to receive that hydrogen, store it. We need piers, jetties, all that infrastructure for that. So any other thoughts or ideas about how to catalyze the hydrogen imports value chain and what needs to happen?
Well, I mean, yeah, if we are zooming a little bit out from the European perspective and the shortcomings of global hydrogen value chain, and then diving and zooming again into the Middle East, I mean, then I would definitely say there are some ways where players like Germany can also facilitate these developments. Coming back to my previously mentioned 3 core challenges of technology, finance, and human capacity. But here we also have to see that, of course, I mean, not all the Middle Eastern states are facing the same challenges. And I would say that, I mean, so far there are different schemes already in place from Germany, for example. We have this H2 up scheme, which is more like, okay, we are really financing pilot projects and really trying to hope that there will be some innovative and really cutting edge technology from those countries. And there are a lot of Northern African countries part of this project, like Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria. But we also have this H2 global scheme. So, and where this is actually maybe also a little bit more interesting and possible for the Gulf states, where they are already investing a lot. So they are investing for green hydrogen, but also for blue hydrogen. They're making this on their own. So especially the oil and gas sector is experimenting for a long time into blue hydrogen and and blue ammonia. And they are really trying to develop this as well. But they are lacking the technology and the human capacity. And here we already have kind of, good cooperation. For example, that ThyssenKrupp is providing the electrolyzers for this 5 gigawatt green ammonia project in Neom City, so in Saudi Arabia City. And I think that, those are schemes we have to foster and to facilitate, but on the other hand, also make sure that, and then we are talking a little bit about a harmonized definition on what is green, what is blue, and then we are talking also about how we can avoid leakages through the whole supply chain and value chain, and how Germany can also play here a role for really making to monitor and to be sure that the whole process is actually clean and will not emit more greenhouse gas emissions. So that would be some ideas. I think that, I mean, giving just the example of Germany, I think that a lot has already been done. But in the same approach that we all know that we need huge amounts of hydrogen, we also have to take care that this process is comprehensive, that it's gradual and not overhasted. And sometimes I have a little bit the fear that there have been established a lot and signed a lot of MOUs, but the shortcomings haven't been addressed fully. So this is something where I wish that this could be a little bit more discussed and in detail also discussed with the partners, for example, in the Gulf.
Thanks so much for that. And indeed, we do see almost on a daily basis many announcements, MOUs from the Middle East and North Africa region, but much more needs to happen, right, to materialize this project. So thanks for that. Peter, any closing thoughts, remarks?
Thank you. We discussed something the other evening, I think it was on Tuesday evening, in the nice discussion or this meeting there was, to be more honest and more realistic about what we really want to do and what we can do. And I think Tobias and Stefan as well mentioned a couple of the points. We should not have any illusions about the climate effect we can have if we don't have all players on the table, or if we don't make sure there's integrity in the process. And it's not worth it investing all the extra cost or having the economic disadvantages if there's no climate effect. If we don't have a net positive climate effect, we will just have an economic disadvantage in Europe. So we will make sure, we will have to realistically assess what are the other players in the world doing, what kind of hydrogen, however you call it, its intensity or its color, what kind of hydrogen we can get if we make the change. And ThyssenKrupp, for example, is doing a very courageous step with that. so we don't enter new dependencies, and we're realistic about what we can achieve with it, and go for the most pragmatic option from a global view, and not just from the through the European lens. That would be my wish.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I would love to hear your thoughts and remark, because we know how important the steel industry is for the society, and it's a building block of the energy system we're trying to build. We need it for wind turbines. I would love to hear your thoughts, and also what is required from policymakers to move the steel decarbonization needle, let's say.
Maybe a little away from the steel. First, I want to say, Peter mentioned a lot of crucial points in technology. We have to looking closer, and the Ministry of Research in Germany is funding a lot of these topics. So just to say, I think we are coming closer to the points in all these topics. But what we need is more pragmatism and more realistic view, and talking about the goal of the European Union to produce 10 million tons of green hydrogen in Europe by 2030 means a capacity of 100 gigawatt of electrolyzers. At the moment, we have a worldwide capacity of 3 to 4 gigawatt. So we need, in 7 years, we need from 3 to 100 alone in Europe, not looking at the other countries. So that's why we really have to scale up, and we need some public money for that, for the scaling up of the electrolyzer industry in Europe. And also we need, and that what we're talking about before, we need funding for the infrastructure. That is nothing we can let to the private sector. We need a pipeline infrastructure, we need the pipelines from the North Sea, from the Mediterranean Sea, also in Germany, in Europe, the backbone system. At the end, this has to be paid by the state. And because if you don't have the infrastructure, it doesn't make sense if there's any ammonia coming on a ship to Rotterdam. So we have to distribute it, and that's what we have to start now. And that was more a political statement at the end, but that's my opinion.
We need to overcome the chicken and egg problem, right? If we don't have the infrastructure, then how can we deploy this fuel? So that's excellent closing remarks. Thank you so much. I think we've come to the end of our panel discussion. I would like to thank you all for your great insights and information you have shared. Thank you so much. And just to let everyone know, this video will be available, the recording will be available on CATF's YouTube website, so channel, sorry. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful day. Thanks.